Okay, so a couple weeks ago I was installing a public art project in Cambridge, Massachusetts, not too far away from here. Installing a public art project for me is like giving birth, in that stronger, more capable people are doing all of the work, and I sit back, watch it all unfold in shock and horror, gasping for breath, passing out occasionally, and shrieking. But when it's all installed and this new piece is out in the world, all dewy and new and shiny, I sit there totally wrecked in awe. In this particular instance, when I was sitting there holding the bottom of a 12-foot deer's leg, a monster truck pulled up to the adjacent intersection. The driver looked over, looked right past me and my glowing pride, looked at the deer, contemplated for a moment, and then said, "What the fuck is that? This city is full of potholes and we're spending taxpayer dollars on giant steel rats? This city's going straight to hell." At that same moment, another person was coming across the crosswalk. She looked over at that man in the monster truck and said, "I know, it's horrible, absolutely horrible." Public art is the most brutal and humiliating forms of creative endeavors. It's times like this that I wonder why I do it at all, and I have to remind myself. So, I studied at the Cleveland Institute of Art. My interests were straddled between industrial design and sculpture, two entirely different disciplines in two entirely different buildings. In industrial design, the focus was on user needs, efficiency, functionality, and you had to dress like a banker. And in sculpture, the emphasis was on the conceptual, materiality, and space, and you had to come to class unwashed. So I really liked aspects of both, and still do, but I could not imagine myself designing a toothbrush, and I could not imagine myself sculpting something, putting it on a pedestal, and letting it suffocate inside of a gallery. So I love my toothbrush. Right? And I love toothbrush designers. Ever since I've had my toothbrush, I've not had a single cavity, and it fits perfectly in the palm of my hand. That is good design. And I also love seeing artwork in a gallery. I enjoy going with my children and observing these works and critiquing them in a space void of context. I genuinely like it. But I could not imagine myself doing either one of those things. And so my professor of psychology at the time suggested I read a book called Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam. In it, Rob talks about the importance of social interaction, the essentialness of social interaction, and that communities with more social interaction, something as simple as eye contact, a good morning hello, a nod of the head on a sidewalk. Communities with more of this are happier, healthier, wealthier, safer, smarter, and more resilient. He talks about the important role that others can play in being catalysts for social interaction. And he talks about art and design being able to, in his words, spark the civic imagination of our fellow citizens to discover and invent new ways of connecting socially that fit our changing lives. Right? For me at this point, this was incredible. Art and design can change the world, right? And very simply, by creating conversation in public space. So, sidebar. Some of you out there are like, "Well, Mr. Reigelman, how does it actually work? I don't actually believe you. That's only one book. What does he know?" I don't have all the answers. I'm an artist. I'm not a scientist or a sociologist. But study after study after study, exploring interaction in public spaces shows that it is absolutely essential. Harvard just released a study a few months ago. I'm sure everyone saw it. It was on the front page of every newspaper in America. That daily social interactions means you will live longer. It's more important than exercise or eating right. You don't have to do those things anymore. You just have to go outside. So get outside and make a new friend or meet up with an old one. Art and design can change the world. So once I had this idea in my head, I tried to figure out, well, what happens when industrial design, sculpture, and public space overlap, right? And this may have been on everyone's radar. It wasn't on my radar. I didn't know what public art was. I had no interest in public space. I never spent any time in public space thinking, what would I do different in this public space? It was not in my world. So my first attempt at this was to look at bus shelters. This is a space that I used on a daily basis, in a place where people were gathering but not interacting. It seemed like an easy win. My idea was, the materials are offsetting. All we need to do is shift materials and people will have conversations. So I took materials from the home, put them in the bus shelters, and what happened? No one used the bus shelters. People stood outside of the bus shelters. And so the project, in most metrics that matter, failed. And so what did we learn? Understand the site and the people that use them. Okay, but I was young and naive, and that didn't bother me that I failed, so I went at it again. The next project I was interested in step sitting. So I'm a Cleveland boy. Step sitting culture was something I'd never heard of until I went to New York City, where I was doing internships, design internships in the summer. And so I was really interested in this idea of step sitting and the history of step sitting. Like, this is the theater seats, right? You have a front row seat to all the craziness that happens in New York City. And I really wanted to create a project that highlighted this unique history and highlighted this interesting kind of social culture. So I created stair squares, which nestled into the rise and runs of steps and acted as a table between two people, or a place to sit with friends, or a table to have a romantic dinner. And so this project was wildly successful. It was my first real public art project. And so from there, I learned, know the history. This is a moment where the history was really interesting and it helped reinforce what I was doing, right? I had an idea or I had an interest. I went into the research that was reinforced by the research, so it gave the project a little more oomph. So from there, I knew public art, this is awesome. It's like, it satisfies my interest creatively. I'm doing good in the world. And there was a level of collaboration that I really liked. So, and I also liked how many facets there were to the work, right? I needed to be a fabricator one day, and then a PR person the next, and then a structural engineer the next, and there's just a lot of interesting layers to it. So I create site-specific public experience. That means I come to a site without any preconceived notion of what should exist, and through site research, community engagement, I create works that I feel are tethered to the site conceptually and formally. So I'm going to show you a few installations of what that looks like. The Great Picnic. This is a project in Cleveland, Ohio, outside the Contemporary Art Museum there. The idea was to design a picnic table for 100. So in this instance, I looked towards my family. When my family has a picnic, we have an annual picnic, it's a shit show every year. There's fighting, there's screaming, everyone's angry, there's crying, and then we all eat lunch. And so I wanted a table that kind of talked about that intersection of ideas and ideology. And so the table is based on a classic picnic table, but it kind of has these intersecting tops, and each top is a different material. I have a different stain. So it's about this idea that you come with your own baggage, but we can still sit and have a meal together. Bluebirds, this is more of an integrated project. This is a project where a small community on the west side of Cleveland, they came to me, they said, we have a little bit of money, we want to do something cool that makes our community special. Amazing. And so I worked with them to create Bluebirds. The idea here is that this waterfront community happens to be an important part of bird migration. And so I like the idea of sculpting the birds out of water. If you've been to Lake Erie, the water isn't blue. But you know, sculpting the birds out of water and then having these gems throughout the neighborhood. And it allowed people to walk around and see the different architecture and just explore the neighborhood in a way that wasn't done before. And this project, this is one of the oldest projects it's one of the original projects. And still to this day, they have tours in Cleveland that can go see this neighborhood and see these bluebirds. It really has captured the hearts of people visiting Cleveland. The Meeting House, this is a project that was done on the Greenway. If you're familiar with the Greenway, it's this kind of the devastating repercussions of the Big Dig. And so the result is this kind of incredible green scar that runs through downtown Boston. And I was interested in local architecture, obviously the duality of space, pedestrians on top and vehicles on the bottom. The idea is that as you're driving your car, you see the bottom of the house. And I was also interested in the destruction of architecture, displacement of people, and things like that. And so the project was very interesting, very complicated to build. We used traditional building techniques, but we're also building it at an angle. So you could only fabricate for about 15 minutes at a time before you start getting a little bit nauseous. But it really was a kind of a wonderful, cool, iconic project. The reading next was at the Cleveland Public Library, and so they have Eastman Reading Garden, and on the facade of the library they have two griffins that guard the entrance of the library. Griffins are very cool, mythical creatures. They build their nests of gold and guard them ferociously. So you'll see these on lots of government buildings throughout the country. So the idea here was going around the neighborhood, going around Cleveland, gathering up pieces of wood in true bird fashion and creating this large nest in the Eastman Reading Garden. It was meant to talk about libraries as a place for nurturing and a place for growth. And it also allowed for a lot of programming. So they had yoga in the morning, children readings in the afternoon, and it really became a nice place, temporary installation for people to gather. And the last project I'm going to show here is Threshold. This is a DATMA project. It was installed in New Bedford a few months ago. It was a really interesting piece. So DATMA, they had this theme of shelter, right? So this is the first project where I've ever had kind of a direction. They had an overarching theme of shelter. And so they wanted me to come in, explore the site, and design a project based on this theme. And so as I was doing my research, I was very interested in the kind of the history. Do you know about the New Bedford history? It's totally weird and insane. Worth a read. Whaley Museum, crazy. And so, but throughout the history, there are these moments where this idea of being welcoming was really highlighted. So a place for people being persecuted for their religious beliefs could go, doors open. A place for immigrants to go to find work, open. A significant part of the abolitionist movement for people running away from slavery in the South, doors were open. And so this was a recurring theme, and I really liked the experience of that partially open door. So this is an 18-foot doorway. It's two-sided. The blue side, which faces the rising sun and the water, that is meant to talk about or represent that watery history. And on the other side, this beautiful mosaic is to talk about that colorful future. So it's very important that you walk up to the work, take a moment, and then cross that threshold, because it is a significant moment in order to kind of cross that threshold into the unknown. So from all of these projects, the thing that I began to understand was the importance of collaboration. It takes so many people to finish any one of these projects. Working with other artists, poets, writers, structural engineers, fabricators, lots of different fabricators, landscape architects, the list goes on and on for the people required to make these projects work. So in terms of my process, I start every project the same. Research. Libraries are my best friends. Librarians are awesome. Local historians are incredible. It's like you can get so much unique information by talking to these people. And so I gather a ton of that before I start sketching at all. The next step for me is observation. How do people use the site? And this is, again, sitting for a couple of days. How do people use the site? What type of people are using the site? Where is the sun coming from? What does the architecture look like? Trying to understand the space. Is there a specific bird that you hear all day long, or is it change from evening to nighttime? So really understanding the site. And then documenting the aspects that seem to float to the top that are most important. All this is relevant for site-specific work, because these types of details will help direct the work. It'll direct the type of fabrication. It'll direct the type of material choices, the duration, the colors used, etc. And then once I have that information, I feel like I have a good understanding of the site, then I do engagement. And that's when I'm doing coffee shop meetups or meeting at bars or restaurants, wherever people are gathering, libraries, and having conversations to understand what people want to see in art, or understand what their stories are. I've heard lots of interesting things like, oh, well, in that river, my father was baptized. It's like, what? That's incredible. And so you get this stuff that you couldn't get from a library, you can only get from face-to-face interaction. And so there's a lot of this, and it's really, really helpful. And at this point, I can also share some ideas. I'm like, well, what do you think about this? And they're like, no. So there's a really rich dialogue back and forth. So the project I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about is a project that in my portfolio is the one that is at the height of social interaction. And so Domino Park Playground is one that I designed. It's a Domino Park in Brooklyn. If you've never been there, it's an incredible space. And so the first step for me is understanding the site. So it is an old industrial manufacturing facility. It took up 7 city blocks, so it's huge on the waterfront in Brooklyn. And so it was also producing in its heyday, it's about 200 years old, it was producing 70% of America's sugar, so a lot of sugar is being produced here. And the client asked me to design a playground. I've not designed a playground before, but they wanted it to be artist driven. So I did research on the site to get a good understanding of its origins. Before they started dismantling the site, I was allowed to take tours of it so I could understand the textures and materials, and I left that being like, let kids play here, it is awesome. Because it really was it was a playground for kids. Lead, that's the problem, lead paint. So, because I even wanted to have portions of the factory be used in the playground, and we just weren't able to. So other parts of outreach, which was fun, was just reaching out on social media. Hey, people with kids, I didn't have kids at this point, what do you like about playgrounds? And parents are like, benches, places to plug in our phones. But they're also like slides, monkey bars, like, we got a lot of good feedback, and then I could calculate, okay, we have 13 votes for slides. Then the other thing I did is borrow other people's children. In New York City, you can't go to playgrounds unless you have a kid. I did not have kids, so I had to borrow other people's kids, which is really cool because you can get a lot of interesting information. First thing you should know about borrowing someone else's kid, they require water and food throughout the day. I did not know this with the first kid, and it did not end well. He survived, but it was not pretty. Then for me, once I have this information, I do a lot of sketching. I wanted to keep the aesthetic industrial, so all of my early sketches were very, very industrial, and I was trying to pull things directly from the original factory. And then the sketches get more developed. I have a very small footprint, so I went up in elevation to really maximize play space. Then that slowly continues to get more developed. Also, I wanted to make sure, I wanted this to be kind of a creepy playground. Like, I didn't want kids to look at this. I showed this rendering to a friend. He's an industrial designer. He's like, it looks like a prison. Don't do it. I'm like, yes, that's exactly right. I wanted kids to look at this and be like, Mom, I don't know if I want to play here. Because I wanted them to be very unsure. So there's like fake broken windows, and this like a lot of hard edges. And it turned into Domino Park Playground, also known as Sweetwater. And so the idea is children enter as sugarcane. They get chopped up. The first slide for bad kids, they get discarded as contaminants. And then you go to, the good kids get to Sweetwater Silo, which is the big one in the middle. And that's where the filtering process is. So they get filtered up and down and up and down and up and down. And the bad kids there get shot out the slide, which is an incredible slide. And then they slowly go through the process until they end as sugarcane, molasses, or contaminants. And so the entire space was designed to mimic that refining process and also capture that industrial aesthetic, but I designed it in a way that parents could fit through also. This is the only park, or at the time it was the only playground in New York that you could go to without your parents. That was something I said from the get-go. I want people to be able to just go down the slide if they want to, so adults can. And so all the spaces are large enough for an adult to get through, but also of code for kids 2 to 5 and 5 to 12. And so, one point that I think is most exciting about this, aside from the cross-section of people that use this park, which is incredible, is that the highest accessible point in the park is in Sweetwater Silo. So the kids have the best views of Manhattan, of Brooklyn. It's really, really cool. Check it out if you ever go, and make sure you go to the top of the silo. Accessibility, very important to me. It's important for a couple of reasons. I grew up in a very non-art family, and now all my friends are art people. So I spend my time between two groups of people, and public art was a way for me to communicate with everyone all together, which is really nice. So my mom knows nothing about art, and she says things like, oh honey, as long as you're happy. I'm like, okay, thanks mom. But public art, she can understand to a certain level. So I can have a really rich conversation with my non-art mother and also have a really rich conversation with former professors. And I think that level of accessibility for me is really, really exciting because it just maximizes the types of conversations and the amount of conversations I can have. So, my non-art friend, Zach, said, Mark, I'm gonna be in Columbus. I would love to see your piece. Send me a pin. Pin sent. A couple minutes later, he goes, good stuff, was very fun and very sturdy. I wasn't sure what he meant because the piece is not very fun, but it is very sturdy. There are fun elements, so if you get close and you see the lattice work, it's comprised of thousands of objects made in Columbus. There's teeth, There's artificial limbs, there's some DeLoreans, there's weird stuff in there. So there are funny things, but the work is not fun. Anyways, then I saw these 3 undulating text dots, and I started getting concerned. And then about 2 minutes later, I got about a dozen pictures of him and other people standing on top of this 22-foot sculpture. I blurred out the image because I think there may be some legal issues, and now I have plausible deniability. But, so I said, Zach, who are all those people? And he said, I asked them for help getting up, then they joined. Was it easy to get on top? 1 chair, 3 people, easy. But what are you doing? This is the city's nightmare. Dude, public art. Everyone interacts with it differently. Yes, that's exactly right. Public art. Everyone interacts with it differently. So, public space is important. Public art is important. We need to spend more time focusing on public space because we know the impact that good public spaces can have on communities. And I'm very excited about the work that all of these artists are doing in trying to improve our built environment. Because with really good built environments, we can really transform communities. So that's it. Thank you very much.